For the final part of this afternoon, we have a panel of industry experts. We have the Queensland State Manager of Hymix, Kristen Devlin. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll get all the gentlemen to wave because I didn't get you to sit in the right order. CEO of Wholesome Australia and New Zealand, George Agriogiannis. G'day, George. General Manager of Gunlake, Angus Richmond, who's sitting just beside me. The CEO of Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, Ken Slattery. Big wave, Ken. General Manager Supply Chain and Logistics at Cement Australia, Blair Price, is sitting on the end. And our live sessions for the day are now over, so it's all up to me. Pressure is on. I hope you found some information helpful in our achieving our goal of zero harm. And as Rocky said, Wholesome's resource library will be available from tomorrow morning. You'll receive an email with a link to the library as well. So let's start with your reflections on the day. I noticed, Kristen, you've been sitting in the corner of this slightly wet room. Every room in Sydney seems to be dripping. Dark room. And we've heard from such a great cross-section of experts in the space of these heavy vehicle and pedestrian interactions. What do you most worry about? What keeps you up at night?
It's the unexpected road incident. I think we've heard it today. Statistically speaking, we may have 100 people in my company, but the clear risk and the clear exposure from a significant incident occurs in the road transport side of the business. And really, the thing that keeps me awake at night is the unexpected vulnerable road user who steps in front of one of my trucks.
Yeah. And what did you hear today that made you think really hard about how to mitigate that risk, or made you worry even harder about what you can't mitigate?
I think seeing some of the technology that is emerging was really exciting to see. I think we were a long way from getting a lot of that embedded into all of our fleets. But I think there's still the uncontrollable aspect. So we still have the hazard, which is the vehicle on the road, but also the behaviour of both our people internally, our drivers, which I think we've got some degree of control over, but the public, and really where we interact with them and the level of uncontrollability to some degree in that.
Blair, we started the day with Inspector Phil Brooks, who had some, really horrific vision, and you could tell that he had personally been had walked with traumatised families through a lot of these experiences, and he compared it to the airline industry. It's very different. There's a lot more trucks on the road than there are planes in the sky in Australia. What do you think of the idea of this sharing of resources across the industry, this additional resources in the space? How much of a piece of the puzzle is that one?
Look, I think as we move forward and the demand in the industry increases, and we're seeing it now, that whole resource pool of drivers and those sorts of things are going to be really, really stretched. So looking at an opportunity of a pool of resource of drivers could potentially do something across the industry where one part's busy and one part's not. There could be a real opportunity to share that aspect. So, and having a pool of trained drivers that are used to driving heavy vehicles all the time, that can go from one type of heavy vehicle to another type of heavy vehicle, could really introduce some positive outcomes for the industry. So.
Okay, and so a lot of what we were seeing, if you could summarise it as people and vehicles, and then other vulnerable individuals and the systems around them, right? So in terms of the people themselves, that was a really interesting piece, Blair, I found. The idea of how do you engage a workforce? How do you leverage what they already know? Yep. How do you let them vent about cyclists before you get to talk about, hey, jump on a bike because you need to be in both spaces here? Was that an eye-opener for you, or is that just developing industry best practice?
I think it's more about developing industry best practice. Like, hey, we've got a driver workforce out there. We've got 50 to 60 to 70-year-old drivers in some cases where you come along with a brand new vehicle and they hop out of a 1 million kilometre truck into a brand new truck and you throw them the keys, they can't get out the driveway. So this whole concept of OEMs having to come and train drivers, so then they're aware of all these safety features that are sitting in trucks that can help them, and be aware of pedestrians on the side and be aware of other trucks coming up the other side, those sorts of things. Like the introduction of cameras, forward-facing, rear-facing in trucks, those sorts of things. You're really seeing the, probably not just for the drivers themselves, but pedestrians and cyclists and other motorists being aware that there's actually cameras in trucks now and people can see and know what's going on around them. So.
And Angus, you're from Gun Lake, which is a large local independent supplier of concrete and quarry products in New South Wales. When you saw all the stuff around telematics, you know, putting things on drivers and videos to see whether they're yawning or the blinks are getting longer or worse, and then you saw a lot of the technology around the trucks. What's your view on that in terms of how you run your business? Is that something for now? Is that just a huge big piece of work you got to do to get your workforce up to speed as well as the new technology, and how do you view that?
Yeah, at Gun Lake, obviously it's all about the people, and we want to recruit good people who care about what they do. But then when you ask about that worry question, we worry how we're going to support them to be safe. So do we overburden them with too many systems, or do we just support them with the right technology? It's a tricky balance between, you know, too many systems, which can be doing safety to a driver, and then you almost don't need a driver. But if the technology is going to reduce harm to the vulnerable road users, then absolutely just, you know, push the boat out, trial the technology on a part of the fleet, and make a decision if it's the right fit for your business. But no, we're very pro technology. You know, we'd like, you know, anything that's going to improve performance and reduce harm, we're supportive of. So. I'm very, very interested to explore it.
Yeah. And what's your experience in terms of the workforce's view of the take-up of this? Have you had experiences of this in the last 5 years that you could share with us?
Yeah, we've rolled out numerous systems in the trucks, and the drivers typically embrace it, but they take, you know, I'd only roll out one system at a time just to give them that time to learn it, you know, support them with the right training, and then bed one system down. And then if it's gone well, then go for the next one. Yeah, and just keep stretching to find what's the best fit for the business.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, you know, you could go to perfect in a hypothetical world, but that might turn out not to be perfect in your world, and then you've got disengagement and you've wasted time and effort.
That's exactly right. You don't want to disempower your people, you want to empower them, unless you're going to go autonomous. But I think, you know,
we're ways off that.
Yeah. So I think the fact that we want to support our people and make sure they've got the right systems.
Ken, we also heard from Lisa Foley at the beginning of the day, right? And she was talking about that in a lot of safety campaigns we're getting to just zero. That's what we're aiming for, zero. Yeah. And in this industry, we saw in a lot of the statistics, a lot of the data across Australia shows crashes are way down. They've hit this kind of floor and it's not going any lower. And at the same time, all these infrastructure projects to come out of the COVID recession are ramping up. So just logically and proportionately, you know, your risk is increasing. I just wonder, is the industry getting it? Is the industry really getting it at this point of going, no, we got to aim for actually zero here?
Yeah, no, I absolutely believe that they are. Our organisation is probably a good example of a central point for the industry to coalesce around the things that it's really interested in. Our agenda really is shaped by what our members find important. And we're doing much more these days around all aspects of occupational health and safety, particularly around that transport piece as well. Just one example, we introduced an agitator rollover prevention course about 2 years ago, and we've had 15,000 drivers that have registered and gone through that course in that time. Now that's a complete sheep dipping almost of the industry in terms of its driver numbers, and that I think in most industries you wouldn't find occur. I mean, I think this is quite a unique situation where there's a very strong degree of focus right around the industry on this issue, and they're prepared to act and they're prepared to put their money where their mouth is.
And why? I mean, you know, there's not a petrol station or a mine site or you know, like a heavy vehicle organisation in the country that hasn't got a safety plan. So why this intense focus at this point?
Look, I'm not sure that it's much more intense than before. Beyond the perhaps the first point that you raised, there is to some degree a threshold that's been reached. There is an extra level of effort that's required to break through that and start to think of new ways of addressing some of these issues. So the role that our organisation's played over the years is really to be a vehicle by which members will come together and share. And one of the unique aspects of the culture of this industry is that it's very happy to share, particularly around the area of health and safety, particularly on operational areas. That don't actually represent a competitive risk, but can deliver a clear result and a clear outcome for the benefit of the industry overall. And I think that is what is unique about this sector.
At this moment?
At this moment.
Yeah, George, what was interesting, a couple of the speakers touched on it, was, you know, just some assumptions. You know, you've got high vis on if you're walking around a concrete plant. There's a whole heap of protocols you've signed in, you've done all of this stuff. The driver has seen the pedestrian has seen the driver, and you can make a whole heap of assumptions about we're all getting it, right? And what they're saying is, no, don't assume that.
No, absolutely not. We should never assume. Assuming leads to potentially a poor consequence, right, or a bad outcome. So it's interesting that you say that, and you mentioned the high vis. So I've been in the industry for 25 years, and what I thought was safe when I started in the industry compared to where we are today is night and day. Back when I started, high vis was not something that was worn. We had drivers and operators refusing to wear high vis because they didn't want to be the odd one out at the end of the day at the pub that they would go to. Whereas now you're embarrassed to go in a white shirt into a pub at the end of a shift because they know that you're not one of the workers, you're one of the people behind the scenes. And I think it's really important that we continuously improve to what sort of Ken was referring to as well. It's about that positive engagement, the ability for us to continue to learn. And as I say, what I thought was okay 25 years ago, we wouldn't dream of doing today. So the whole interaction between whether it's vulnerable road users or pedestrians, and as we know, part of the reason of why we're here today is because of an unfortunate incident that occurred at one of my sites at Caringbah. I guess we need to be aware of what we've put in place to prevent those things. So to motivate our people to do something different tomorrow is very easy when you understand the consequence of what can happen when things don't go to plan.
But I guess a theme that's come through is it needs to be dynamic.
It absolutely does, right? So set and forget is not okay. So one of the conversations I was having with Ken earlier as a member of the association, the industry body, is how do we not just do these types of things, and we don't traditionally, but how do we do more of these types of events when there isn't on the back of a consequence? How do we proactively engage? Not just with our industry, so I think we've spoken a lot about, and obviously this is around the vulnerable users on the roads, whether that's in a light vehicle or as a pedestrian, whether that's on the road or on one of our sites. How do we educate people about that? How do we continuously improve in that aspect? So my personal reflection is, you know, as a young man growing up in Sydney, driving a vehicle, before I was involved in the construction material industry, I had no regard for truck drivers and what they could or couldn't do, in the sense that I didn't understand. So if I saw a gap at a set of lights and I thought I should get in there,
sure.
I would, right? Now,
You're that guy.
I was that guy 26 years ago, right? But today, you wouldn't dream of doing that, right? Because you do understand what it takes to bring one of those vehicles to a stop,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even as I think I mentioned to you earlier, driving here today, I saw a truck stopped in an awkward position, had to reverse, and cars are zipping around behind this truck. Now, how do we not just educate our own people and our drivers who are trying to do the best they can, okay? And our technology enables us to proactively manage our drivers in the sense that if we see there's a gap, somebody's braking too hard, accelerating too aggressively, etc., cornering too hard, then we can have those conversations and we can re-educate. What we need to do, though, is how do we get out into the broader community and how do we share these stories with our families? How do we motivate the community to understand what our industry and the broader trucking industry is all about, and what role they play to put themselves out of harm's way? It's our job to make sure our vehicles are safe, have the right equipment, the right technology, absolutely, granted. But the community plays a role in this as well, right? So for any of us that walk around the CBD and you see people wearing headphones crossing the road, not at a set of lights, you know what? You're playing Frogger, right? It's not an appropriate outcome, right? And it's more luck than circumstance. You know?
So, Kristen, there was a real call to action from Lisa Foley as well at the beginning of the day, which was around the treatment of drivers, not necessarily by their employer, but if they're going to a manufacturing site to drop off, you know, and she was saying that, you know, one driver was given a chair in a hallway, and every time somebody came by, he had to stand up and pull the chair out of the way. You know, where's the shower? Where's the bed if she needs to have a lie down?
Yeah.
Where's the, you know, room where they can genuinely have that 15 minutes, whatever that they need for that period of time? To what extent is this about really having those conversations about not only how you're looking after your staff and how you're listening to their wisdom about what makes their work safe, but getting that across to the people that you're meant to be dancing in front of, who are your customers, and saying, you know what?
Sometimes it's about making the tough call and potentially not supplying that customer, or at least and potentially losing that customer's business. We supply a whole range of different construction sites, from the very large infrastructure projects down to, you know, the small fencing project where there's a couple of potholes of fencing to go in, and all along that spectrum, the safety standards on those sites vary.
And have you ever pulled a pin on a customer?
Yeah, unfortunately regularly. And sometimes it's down to the behaviour of the customer towards our drivers, or it's down to the actual conditions on that site, or the lack of a spotter being provided, or whatever it might be. And unfortunately, our sales reps and the guys that are customer facing spend quite an amount of their time carefully having conversations with customers about improving their safety. A great example, and I think we as an industry can lead their behaviour to some degree. I know some of my customers know when it's a high mix truck coming to site, they need to provide the 600mm spacing between two trucks on a pump. They just know that we expect that, and we won't supply until we get that. Whereas potentially other players may not demand as much, and they can get away with a little bit less. And I think it's just about being the industry leaders and expecting it and driving it at all levels of that customer interaction.
Maybe a question to Blair and Angus together. When you're looking at the sorts of technologies that we're seeing, that's all well and good, you know, collecting all that telematics data. And you get that back to head office, and then you sort of remember back to what the inspector was showing us in terms of his guys, police officers on the side of the road, jumping into a truck with that sense of curiosity and going, you've taken the speed limiter off this, you've got cocaine. I'm not for a minute suggesting all drivers, right? Absolutely not for a minute. But I cannot imagine that you don't have the same difficulties that all industries have, and this is the particular difficulty. Uppers and downers and whizzers and God knows what. How, like, be honest, how are they finding, how are the coppers finding that, and it's not being found at the depot before drivers drive off?
I'll go first. Look, I think we're dealing in slightly different environments to a certain extent.
Yes.
Like we're in an environment where, to be honest, these guys are all my customers. So so I have different sort of views of how we go from a downstream perspective, because we're slightly upstream. But look, every one of our trucks that are out there, hey, they have the telematics in there. We're accredited from an NHVR perspective, so we spend a lot of time around that focus around compliance. So, and because of that, and it's not about...
And presumably it's not only kind of illegal and immoral, but it's a competitive risk to you.
Oh, absolutely.
If you've got people who aren't doing that, because presumably it's cheaper not to. I say that understanding what an unethical statement that is, but it is, right?
Look, in reality, one of my trucks does the wrong thing and kills someone on the road. That could put my whole fleet off the road. It'll stop the industry, per se. So we're very conscious...
But what I'm saying is people who don't do it are undercutting you on price, presumably.
Potentially, yes. Yeah, potentially. But I guess we're very conscious that if we don't set that standard and adhere to it, we could be the ones that actually shut down the industry for a period of time. So we're extremely conscious from that perspective. But I guess we're also we want to be the ones that are sitting out there and showing how we can lead the industry in a compliant space as well. So when others look to us and say, geez, their trucks are on the road and they're compliant, then maybe we can, how are they doing it? Maybe we can get out and educate people as well. So.
Same question, Nathan.
Yeah, I think when Blair's talking about long haul cement, it can be long haul into the country. For us, it's more about the tippers long haul up and down the motorway. But the agitator drivers are in and out all day. There's no fatigue issues, and there's certainly no speed issues. You've got local speed limits, so those risks are a lot lower in an agitator fleet, I think. But for the longer haul fleets, there are risks around speeding and risks around fatigue. But I think our drivers, one of our drivers was in a bad accident the other day, and the police arrived on site and went for his logbook straight away. But fortunately, the motorist, the car that hit our truck and knocked our truck off the road, actually admitted fault straight away, and he said he sneezed. So we suspect he was on his mobile phone, but regardless, but everything was in order for us, fortunately. So the logbook was in order. The truck maintenance records are all up to speed. So I think that the main players in the industry, it is a low probability that a driver's going to misbehave and tamper or take drugs.
Can I make a comment just in terms of the difference in competitiveness? I think a really important role that we all play as consumers or end users of a logistics fleet, whether it's somebody providing a service to us or an out service. If it's too good to be true in terms of a rate, it normally is too good to be true. So we play a role. So us driving down rates in some situations is not the appropriate outcome for the leaders in our industry. We need to ensure we know what it costs to deliver from point A to point B. And if a price comes in that's 10 or 20% lower than that, well, we should be sort of setting off some alarm bells that they're probably not doing the right things. And we go through some pretty extensive checks as well to make sure that people are doing the right things before they are subcontracted. And I'm sure it's the same for the majority of the key players in the industry, large independents and alike as well. We also have random drug and alcohol testing as well, right? Now, similar to what the police do, and we step it up when we see a spike in cases in terms of how frequent the randomness is, to ensure that we mitigate that risk, okay? It's not an appropriate risk, it's not an acceptable risk. And I've got to say, actually having the police doing the random drug and alcohol tests as well, we were ahead of the game probably as an industry,
right,
in doing the drug testing, the random drug testing. Alcohol, obviously the police have been doing that for a long time, but the fact that now the general public are exposed to that as well is a welcome outcome for us. Taking others off the road, similar to what you've described there, Angus, is that somebody else has hit our vehicle, one of our vehicles. That can happen as well, can lead to another consequence. So swerving to avoid can lead to a greater consequence as well. So we need to make sure that everybody on the road is doing the right thing as well.
Ken, I was fascinated to see that really passionate presentation about red zones and the chili system and empowering the work, key opinion leaders in that change management setting to say, I'm going to give that, I'm going to give that a dozen chilies and see how that works. Do you see it as your role as kind of the industry association to be seeding those sorts of ideas and sharing those sorts of ideas across the industry?
Yeah, well, look, we do. Much of the germination of those ideas, though, comes directly from members in terms of the issues that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So we have a transport committee that looks at safety-related issues on a regular basis now, and has progressed really a range of activities in that transport and freight space over the last several years. But there are often new conversations that are starting to emerge around this, and I think that compliance issue is one that is starting to be talked about to a greater degree now, and what role the industry, as through its industry body, can play in supporting that heavy vehicle compliance approach, to make sure that those risks are taken out early and that the standards are set at a suitably high level. But industry associations are exactly the vehicle for that sort of work to occur. And I think there's a pretty strong recognition that if the industry gets around and manages its issues around this, you're going to avoid a less understanding, less flexible, less suitable approach that might be dropped down from government.
A compliance system. Look, this might be an odd question, Kristen, but I guess if you took this back some many years, I guess the enemy of a safety, an effective safety program is a kind of she'll be right attitude, and that goes to culture.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
How much difference does it make having a more diverse leadership involved?
You're absolutely right. The safety of an organisation is shaped by its culture, and the leader shapes the culture. So to have leaders that are visible and engaged in their operations on a daily basis is crucial. In terms of diversity, I think we can always benefit from diversity. There's no question in that. And diversity isn't just whether it's gender diversity, but it's diversity on experience, different industry experiences, different life experiences can shape people's perceptions of risk, and then those perceptions of risk can then help us understand things that perhaps we haven't seen previously. So a great example, I came out of the cement industry and moved into the concrete industry, and I was quite shocked initially at the number of truck movements on our very small postage stamp size sites and how we were controlling vehicle and pedestrian interactions on those sites. And it was at a time where I think a few years ago we didn't quite have that up together, but certainly our company as an industry as a whole has really focused on that in the last few years, and the sites we go to are 100% different because of this understanding of pedestrians on our sites and pedestrians and their exposure, and the fact that there's blind spots on trucks. You just simply can't see pedestrians in certain positions around a truck. So yes, diversity, without a doubt, whatever the topic is, always plays a positive role in any sort of change you want to make or any sort of leadership. But really ultimately is visible leadership and being on the ground, being in the trucks, going for a drive with a driver on a regular basis. We require that in our organisation. Leaders, yeah, and it's astounding the experience you gain from that. So
what do they tell you?
Yeah, you get the truth. I went for a drive just last week. One of my new drivers, Fardol, we went and delivered to just a small job, and then had to go to the tip afterwards to dump some leftover concrete. And leaving the tip, he was all over it. He was like, I've got to be careful here because as I emerge from here, there's a whole bunch of bikes that come past this entrance to this tip all the time, and they're in my blind spot. And then a little bit later on, we were a bit closer to the plant, and we were coming to a T intersection. He goes, this is the same as back there. There's bikes come screaming through here. They never see us. I've got to hang back. I've got to watch. And they are absolutely aware of what's going on out there, and we can learn so much from their experiences. And just going for a 1 or 2 hour ride with a truck a couple of times a month if you can manage it, or at least once a quarter, absolutely opens your eyes to the challenges they face on the road and what we can then do to help them.
And Lisa set up at the beginning WorkSafe New South Wales, which is heartbreaking for her. A driver comes all the way from Adelaide, and she gets to where she's going, and that's the load shifted. There's something that's gone wrong. Where George, maybe George, Blair, and Angus, all the same sort of question. What do you see if there's one area of your business that you really wanted to improve, whether it's processes, whether it's technology, where that greatest risk is? That wonderful example of the guy with the warplanes. Don't worry about the things that cause the small things. Worry about the things that cause the enormous thing. What's the one area that you'd love to improve?
I actually don't think it is one area, just for what it's worth. And there's no silver bullet.
It's too interconnected.
There is no silver bullet, right? So this is about the education of drivers that we're bringing on. It's about re-education of the drivers that we have currently working for us to avoid that complacency. It's ongoing. Like you said, you can't stand still and think that everything's going to be okay. So as technology emerges, improving that technology, it's actually retrofitting the balance of the fleet with the newer technology that becomes available. So it's an ongoing thing. So it's about, for me particularly, it is around culture, and it's making our people feel comfortable enough to raise the issue and actually celebrate the fact that they have raised an issue.
Do they raise near misses with you?
Yes, they do. More so today than what they did previously, because we celebrate those. We actually say, look, thank you, appreciate the fact that you brought that up, and let's find ways that we can tackle that tomorrow in terms of not have it continuing to occur. Again, some time ago, we talk about drivers going to a site and there being an issue. A number of years ago, it would have been the 10th truck that would raise the issue on the one site.
Right.
Now it's the first or second truck. So we know that we're finally getting into their heads as well. Going on the ride-alongs, actually getting into the psyche of what do drivers see, what are their frustrations, what can we do to help them is really important. And I think, Angus touched on it as well. Too much technology can become a distraction as well. They're professional drivers, okay? This is what they're employed to do, and it's our job to make sure we give them the best tools available for them to get the best outcome. So for me, I think I didn't really answer your question other than it is a combination of all of the above. But fostering a culture where we encourage people raising issues and concerns is really, really important. Our people come to work to do the right thing. Nobody sets out to do the wrong thing when they come to do their shift. And I think it's really important to understand that and we need to encourage that people do continue to feel that they have a voice and they can share that, and where we've got an ear that wants to listen and actually improve. Okay.
That's a really good point, George. I think you're right. What we've seen substantially different with the introduction of cameras in trucks is now drivers come back and say, can you look at the video I've recorded?
Yes, have a look at this.
It's
driving all sorts of social change.
Absolutely, and teaching moments for other drivers, and ultimately you see people taking away and doing safety shares of this is what we're seeing on the road, that type of thing. So it's been really positive there. And I guess the other part for me is because we do have a lot of long haul drivers, we've got the mix of drivers doing 20 Ks during the day 5 times, or we've got guys that are taking 3 days to get to sites, and then it's that fatigue moment. It's that one moment 4 or 5 times a year that you go, geez, that driver's got to be pulled over because he's fatigued. And it might be guys that have just driven 4 hours down the road. We talked about it before, and I see a couple of questions popping up about Agi drivers, and you go, we're doing some trials at the moment that George is aware of around seeing iGuardian technology in the trucks and fatigue management. And what we're finding is these events aren't happening to the long haul drivers doing 12-hour shifts or 13-hour shifts. They're happening in the first 3 and 4 hours of a shift, which is remarkable. So it's metro drivers that are having a little blink in short hauls, which is quite remarkable. So you go, there'll be some correlations to what we're seeing in our big tankers to what's going on in all those little small trucks running around there. So.
And for me, it's just about driving cultural improvement. I've been really impressed from everything we've heard today from all parts of the industry that everyone gets culture and empowering good people. We find in any given business or yard, if the worst performer leaves the business because, whether they're the late person or the distraction, they can't concentrate driving, and a great person comes in there to replace them, the whole tide lifts of the whole team. The whole team perform better, and they look out for each other in the yards where there are. They drive slowly, they talk to each other, they communicate. The great people care about each other and themselves and the road users. And I just find if we can get that right, that really reduces risks out there. So getting the culture right, but supporting them with great processes.
What about the sort of status, Ken, of drivers? We've just heard Angus say that he really values good staff who wouldn't. But when the inspector was speaking before, and these would be outliers in the business, you'd think, about young people who've been playing video games all night, or people who might have a drug and alcohol problem, or whatever, which I suppose is something to hang on to because it makes some sense, right? Whereas the driver who's had 10 hours sleep and is nodding off after 2 hours, you can't get your head around that, can you? So you focus on the thing that you think is the problem. But to what extent is that the problem? Should we, is that a problem in the industry of you should only be doing one job and you should have some pilot style blow on the bag stuff around it, which I know businesses on this stage do?
Well, there's probably no simple answer to that either. I mean, there will always be, to some degree, someone that will attempt to do the wrong thing in terms of how they address their role. The real test, I think, is how those guys are engaged and intercepted almost, but managed by their employer. And I think the story that you're hearing about the importance of getting a good safety culture really embedded right through the organisation goes a long way to make people realise what the right thing is. And my experience around this is that if people are doing the wrong thing, they won't be doing the wrong thing for very long. That the safety of others, not just the safety of themselves, but the safety of others is a really important issue, and no one has got the right to endanger anybody else as part of their workplace activity. So look, you could never say that it would never happen because people are people. But the processes, I think, that are in place broadly around the industry are such that it really is minimised.
Kristen, what about that point? You know, the driver says to you, there's cyclists coming out of here. So we heard Transport New South Wales. There's two ways you can look at that. You can flip your thinking and going, well, why are there cyclists here? Or you can say, well, isn't this driver good that they know they're cyclists? Why the hell are the cyclists flying out of the... So that's part of the systems response.
Yeah, and design safety
And
as
how
well.
well is that integrated? Like, it's all well and good for you to do a drive along and really say, isn't that amazing that you could manage this huge, but how many tonnes of equipment? But you've got a systemic problem there.
Yeah, and it's about design safety. And I think in the greening of our cities, which I'm all for the sustainability of our cities, we are unfortunately seeing a larger proportion of cyclists and people through main roads, and some of those pathways may not be as well designed as they could be. Certainly there's examples where there's fantastic separation, there's hard barriers, and people and bicycles and trucks and heavy vehicles are separated. But in other cases you've got T-junctions where there's 2 or 3 heavy industries just down the road, and you've got a major cycleway into the centre of the city running straight through, and it's a real challenge. Yeah.
Blair, how do you deal, another question for you, Blair and Angus, how do you deal with that issue around complacency? Not suggesting for a moment either of you are complacent, but you're going along and you're doing all the right things, and as George said, you don't want that terrible incident, whatever it might be, to be the thing that pulls you up and refocuses you. So how do you approach that? Do you every now and again say, OK, I'm going to take the plate, I'm going to flip it over, I'm going to pull the tablecloth out from underneath everything, and we're just going to do it. What's the boss doing today? Is that your approach? Or is that just my lunatic suggestion? Angus?
That's not our approach. We just want to get better every day. We just want to improve gradually. And if we're constantly finding problems for fixing them, improving, if you're constantly improving, you know you're better today than you were last week. And that's all you can do. That's how we look at it. We just want to get better and better, and steal all the great ideas that other people, like some of the issues we've learned.
Well, they're giving them away, yeah.
That's right. We'll raid that website later. But no, it's anything we can learn, we'll steal, and it's great that people share. So no, all you can do is just strive to improve and be comfortable with that. I think we're striving for perfection, but we'll never get there. So we just have to great and hire great people, trust great people, and support them, and eliminate risk where we can.
And do they tell you? Do you have line of sight of all that, of how many near misses, of what the issues are? Do you feel like you have a good sense of that?
We feel that our culture enables people to report. Sometimes where there's a fear of reporting due to reprisals or people losing their job, they may not report, and then you can't learn the lessons. But we feel that our culture is pretty open. Maybe we're too gentle, but we feel that if the people trust us, they will tell us, and then we can fix it. But if we don't know, we can't fix it. So.
And you tell them that?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you've got any ideas, let us know. I attend toolbox meetings at 5 in the morning, and that we listen. We listen to the drivers, we take notes, and we fix the problems. So that's our approach.
Right.
Look, been around long enough to know you can't just change things like that. So I'm pretty simple around this. It's got to be consistent, simple message and consistent. And I think Angus is right, getting out, talking to drivers, having frontline leaders there, having that communication, frontline communication all the time is pretty much the key to being able to steer. I think the organisation where we want to do it, but just going, no, I'm going to change it like that and to a different direction is not going to happen anyway. So.
We're nearly out of time, George. A key insight that you've got out of the whole planning of this day and the execution of it?
I think from what I've seen, certainly, and the feedback I've been getting through the day, the execution has been fantastic, okay? It's been very professionally coordinated, In terms of key insights, I think we're starting to see, and I think it's an opportunity for us, and part of the reason why Ken's here today as well, is that how do we foster what each individual company or organisation has within our own sector, as our own industry, and leverage off what the broader community are doing as well in terms of other big logistics businesses. We're effectively logistics companies that just happen to produce cement and crush rocks and get sand and mix it all together in the form of concrete, right? But we are a big trucking organisation, right? We're very much a logistics business. So not only how can we learn from what we're each doing through our association, but learn from the other industry experts. For me, it's about sharing those stories. There's nothing that motivates people more or gets people aligned than understanding what these incidents can look like and what they can lead to, right? So I come back to Carrying Bar, right? And somebody mentioned earlier today the ripple effect. It's a horrible scenario. An unfortunate incident has changed somebody's life forever. Not just their life, but their family's life. And I've been exposed to that personally with an incident in a previous organisation where I ended up in the intensive care unit looking after our employee, or certainly visiting the people that were looking after our employee, and seeing his wife running down the corridor, crying, not knowing what she was going to see. It gives me goosebumps today, and I don't wish that upon anybody. So whatever we can do as an organisation, as Wholesome, and how we can leverage off of our broader association to get the messages out there. And if a situation like what we've done today is replicated over time, and we're doing it proactively to continue to learn, and how we take those learnings out to the broader community. So we've heard about the things that we do with our drivers. And yes, there are some bad eggs in everything, okay? And we have a role to play in managing those people out of our business, but they end up working for somebody else. Maybe not in our industry, but they're driving a truck somewhere else. So how do we work through that process? How does that look? And then more broadly, how do we educate new drivers, people coming in from overseas, and how do we educate kids? I know my kids have got a very strong appreciation for trucks. It's how do we share those stories and get those learnings out to the broader community? And I think for me, that's my takeaway. I think that we do a reasonable job. We've got a long way to go, and complacency is dangerous, right? So we're constantly striving to improve, and we will continue to look for opportunities to improve. But part of that is bringing others along on that journey as well, and sharing that message with the broader community. And that's something that we need to work on.
Thank you. They're very, very, very nice final comments, and very much wrapping up the feel of the day, and the fact that almost every speaker could name somebody or talk about an incident in their lives that very much, they wish hadn't been in their lives, but motivates them to do better and to look after their fellow Australians. Thank you all so much. That was a wonderful panel discussion.